The storm hadn't yet passed, but Frank Miller was already outside, ladder in hand, jaw set against the wind that whipped through the battered trees. Rainwater clung to his silver hair as he steadied the aluminum ladder against the side of the house. The shingles had torn loose again, just like the last storm. He couldn't afford to wait, not with more rain on the forecast and a mortgage barely being held together by hope and duct tape. From the kitchen door, Sarah watched silently, her tea cooling untouched in her hands. "Frank, maybe you should wait. Call someone." Her voice was quiet, but firm. Frank didn't look back. "And pay storm prices? I've climbed worse during raids, Sarah." But someone else objected. Wolf. The old German shepherd was already pacing, whining, his paws tapping an urgent rhythm on the soaked deck. He circled the base of the ladder, then stepped in front of Frank, eyes wide with something close to panic. Frank sighed. "Not now, boy." Wolf responded by gripping the hem of Frank's pant leg between his teeth and pulling, not with playfulness, but a silent, desperate warning. "Wolf, stay," Frank commanded, voice sharp with the authority of decades on the force. It was a tone the dog had never disobeyed, until now. Wolf refused. He moved again between Frank and the ladder, blocking every attempt. His ears flattened, his tail stiffened. It was a silent scream. "Don't go up." But Frank went anyway. Halfway up, the wind struck with a sudden vengeance. The ladder shifted, sliding in the softened earth. Frank reached for the gutter, but it gave way. He fell. 12 feet. A single breath of silence. Then the sound. Flesh and bone against stone. Sarah's scream fractured the stillness as she ran, slippers slipping on the wet grass. Frank lay still, his body twisted unnaturally, blood seeping from a wound at his temple. Wolf was already at his side, nose pressed to Frank's hand, then to his face, licking frantically, whining. Then the sound tore from him, a howl that cut through the neighborhood like grief made flesh. Not a bark, a cry. Sarah's trembling hands fumbled with her phone as she dropped to her knees beside her husband. Frank, can you hear me?" Her voice cracked, carried away by the wind. Wolf remained beside him, his body rigid, amber eyes locked onto Frank's pale face. The ambulance arrived in a flurry of red and white. Medics took over with clinical precision. Collars, straps, murmured codes. But even they had to pause, unsure how to navigate the loyal guardian, who refused to move until Sarah, through tears, whispered his name. "Wolf, let them help him." The shepherd stepped aside slowly, as if reluctant to release what remained of his partner's life to strangers. At the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced stormlight. Machines beeped, screens blinked, and the word coma hung heavy in the air like a verdict. Severe brain trauma, fractured spine. Minimal activity, the doctor said. Unresponsive. Sarah clutched Lisa's hand. Michael hadn't arrived yet. She stared at the MRI scan, as if her belief alone could change the gray shadows on the screen. But it was Wolf who refused to believe it most. He lay beside Frank's bed when allowed, unmoving, ears twitching only at the sound of machines. When forced out, he sat at the ICU door, staring through it as if willing the walls to dissolve. And then, late one silent night, when even the monitors seemed to breathe slower, the heart monitor let out a beep, then another, faint but rising. The nurse called it a glitch. Wolf called it proof. Frank Miller had once been known as Stone Cold in the Riverside Police Department. 27 years on the force, most of them as the lead K-9 handler. He faced down drug lords, gang wars, and burning buildings without a tremor in his hand. But now, he lay motionless beneath hospital linen, his strong hands limp, his eyes closed against the sterile lights. Wolf stayed. He didn't understand medicine, only presence. He understood the sound of his partner's heartbeat slowing, the shifting rhythm of the machines, and the quiet sobs Sarah muffled into tissues. The hospital made an exception to their no animals policy. It wasn't a matter of regulation anymore. It was respect. "He's like a soldier on guard duty," Nurse Wilson whispered. "I've never seen grief like this, not even in humans." Sarah came every day, folding herself into a routine that barely resembled life. Lisa read aloud from Frank's favorite nature books. Michael sent money, advice, and guilt from Chicago. But it was Wolf who held the vigil. For hours, he'd lie beside the bed, with his head resting just inches from Frank's hand. When Frank twitched, whether from reflex or dream, Wolf's ears would perk, his tail thump once, then still again. Once, when a nurse tripped the ventilator's wire by accident, it wasn't the machine that first reacted. It was Wolf. A growl, a warning, an instinctive defense. Frank's condition remained unchanged. Doctors cautioned against hope. Wolf didn't listen. Each morning, as sunlight warmed the east window of the long-term care unit, Wolf would rise, stretch, and nuzzle Frank's arm gently, as though checking if that day would be the one. As weeks turned to months, the hospital monitors became background music to the Millers' lives. Frank's room transformed, not into something cheerful, but something sacred. Framed photos lined the windowsill. Lisa brought wind chimes that clinked gently when the window cracked open. And Wolf, he remained the soul of the room. Doctors warned Sarah gently, then firmly. "We have to prepare for the possibility that Frank won't wake," Dr. Reynolds said during the 3rd month. "You must consider long-term options, cost, quality of life." But Sarah only nodded and went back to rearranging Frank's blanket. "He's still in there. I know it." She wasn't alone in that faith. Wolf would rise before dawn each morning, his routine unwavering. Check the door, check the monitors, check Frank. Always Frank. He would press his muzzle to his hand, ears forward, nose flaring as if willing a scent of change. The hospital staff grew used to his presence. Some brought treats. Others whispered "good boy" when passing. A nurse once caught him nosing a blood pressure cuff toward her, as if anticipating the procedure. And though his coat had dulled slightly, though the gray at his muzzle thickened, Wolf stayed strong, even when Sarah could not. On bad days, when Sarah's voice cracked mid-sentence while talking to Frank, Wolf would lean into her leg, pressing all his weight into her, holding her up with nothing but bone, fur, and faith. One night, as the machines beeped softly and rain tapped the window, Lisa whispered, "He's waiting." "Wolf doesn't believe Dad is gone." And Sarah answered, "Neither do I." When insurance stopped covering Frank's hospital stay at the 6-month mark, there was no decision to make, only inevitability. Sarah brought him home. The house transformed overnight into a makeshift ICU, monitors, feeding tubes, a rented hospital bed where the desk once stood. The scent of antiseptic replaced garden soil and lemon soap. But it was home. Frank was home. Wolf adapted instantly. He patrolled the halls like a soldier returned to post, alert to every beep and blink. When the ventilator hiccuped or the feeding line kinked, he would pace and whine until Sarah or the nurse noticed. More than once, he detected something before the alarms did. Sarah learned the rhythm of this new life with a quiet fierceness. The days blurred with feedings, repositioning, blood pressure checks, and whispered conversation with a man who couldn't respond. But even silence needed companionship, and Wolf never left her side. Finances tightened. Sarah took early retirement. Lisa offered to move back home, but Sarah refused. Michael, practical as ever, suggested assisted care. We'll find a way, Sarah insisted. He would have done the same for me. Wolf's health began to wane. He ate less, slept more. The sharpness in his gaze dulled, but never left. Not when it came to Frank. Not when it mattered. He's working himself to death, Lisa murmured after one visit, her fingers pressing gently along Wolf's ribs. He won't stop. He can't, Sarah whispered. He made the same promise I did. Winter crept in, frosting the edges of the miller's windows and deepening the silence inside the house. Each breath Frank took was machine-assisted, each heartbeat watched more by Wolf than by man. And still, life continued, not with joy, but with ritual. Mornings began the same. Wolf would rise at 6, stretch stiff limbs, then nose Frank's hand gently, always waiting for a response that never came. Sarah would smile faintly and say, "He's checking for orders," like old times. Kate, the home nurse, now visited only once a week. Budget cuts. Yet even she marveled at Wolf. "That dog anticipates me, moves before I ask. He's more in tune with Frank than anyone I've seen." And he was. Wolf had become part of the medical team, silent, reliable, unwavering. When Kate reached for a stethoscope, Wolf had already moved to the other side of the bed. When she needed to suction Frank's airway, he stepped aside without command. He didn't guard anymore. He participated, but the signs of age were undeniable. His coat had lost its sheen. His steps were slower. Sarah noticed how he sometimes stumbled on the stairs or slept longer in the afternoon sun. Still, he never once failed to rouse when Frank's monitor skipped a beat. "You need to rest too," Sarah would whisper, kneeling to mix broth into his kibble. "We both do." Wolf would eat a few reluctant bites to appease her, then return to the foot of Frank's bed, resuming his post like a soldier who could not allow himself the luxury of collapse. Thomas Wilson came bearing smiles and pity. He stood on the miller's porch in a tailored suit and spoke of compassion. "This house is large, expensive to maintain. I could help ease your burden, Mrs. Miller." Wolf stood between them, low growl curling in his chest. Sarah's voice was calm but cold. "Our home is not for sale." Wilson didn't flinch. "Think about your future, about dignity. Sometimes letting go is the kindest choice." After he left, Wolf remained at the door, hackles still raised, staring down the empty driveway. Inside, a different pressure built. Michael had returned from Chicago for a weekend visit. His eyes scanned the IV bags, the suction tubes, the narrowing stack of unpaid bills on the table. "We can't keep this up," he said, his voice low. "Dad wouldn't want to bankrupt the family." Lisa's face hardened. "Don't you dare pretend to know what he'd want. You're barely here." "I'm being realistic." "You're being cold." In the hallway, Wolf let out a soft whine, discomforted not by words, but the tone that came with them. That night, Lisa stayed up late with Sarah, both women staring at Frank's still frame beneath the hospital linens. "He's still in there," Lisa whispered. "I know it. Wolf knows it too." Sarah said nothing, but her hand never let go of Frank's. As the second year approached, the world outside grew sharper, colder. Wilson's visits stopped being polite. Property tax assessments mysteriously rose. Anonymous complaints to the Homeowners Association poured in. Sarah came home one day to find a utility shutoff notice that had been intercepted and hidden among garden catalogs in the mailbox. "He's trying to force us out," Lisa said, shaking with anger. "And you think that's a coincidence?" Michael urged caution. "We don't have proof, and we don't have money for a lawsuit either." "We don't need proof," Lisa snapped. "We need to not let him win." The siblings' bond frayed further. Michael visited less. Lisa stayed longer. Wolf remained constant, his loyalty stretching across both the visible fractures and the silent ones. Then came the letter, an official envelope from Memorial Hospital's Ethics Committee. Sarah read the words once, then again. Recommendation to transition to comfort care. Minimal improvement observed over 24 months. No longer aligns with best practices. The world blurred. She sat beside Frank's bed, hands shaking, the paper crumpling in her lap. "They're giving up," she whispered. 3 days. "They're giving me 3 days to prepare to let you die." Wolf rose from the floor and placed his muzzle gently on her knee, eyes meeting hers with unwavering clarity. "We're not giving up," she said aloud to both of them. "Not now. Not ever." Sarah didn't sleep the night the letter came. She sat beside Frank, watching the rise and fall of his chest under the glow of blinking monitors. The paper still gripped in her hand like a weapon she didn't know how to use. Thunder cracked outside, but the real storm was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m., the ethics committee meeting that would determine if Frank's life support should be withdrawn. Lisa was furious. They don't know him. They haven't seen what Wolf sees. Michael, pragmatic as ever, booked a flight. "We'll face it together," he said over the phone, his tone unreadable. Thursday brought cold rain and a visitor no one welcomed, Thomas Wilson. He pulled into the driveway with clinical precision, umbrella tucked beneath one arm, a leather folder under the other. "I heard about the hospital's recommendation," he said when Sarah opened the door. "I've drawn up a proposal. Fair market value for the house. More than fair, given the circumstances." Wolf was already at Sarah's side, growling. "Get off my property," she said, voice flat and ice cold. "You're making an emotional mistake," he warned. "And you're one comment away from regretting yours." Wolf took a step forward. Wilson took one back. The folder hit the porch floor as he retreated. Sarah didn't pick it up. Later that night, as lightning split the sky and the house trembled beneath the storm's weight, Sarah found herself whispering to Wolf, "They all think this is the end." The dog lifted his head from beneath the bed and blinked at her slowly. But they're wrong. Friday arrived gray and grim, like the day itself already knew what it was meant to carry. Sarah dressed Frank slowly, carefully. His blue shirt, the one that brought out his eyes, slacks instead of hospital pants. "You're going in looking like yourself," she whispered, "not like a case file." Wolf watched every movement, more tense than ever. As Sarah smoothed the blanket over Frank's legs, Wolf began pacing from the bedroom to the front door and back again, his nails clicking against the floor in a frantic rhythm. He whined softly, ears swiveling toward distant sounds. "He knows," Lisa said quietly, watching him. "He feels it." Michael offered to give him a sedative from the vet's emergency kit. "It'll help keep him calm in the ambulance." "No," Sarah replied. "He needs to be there, fully there." The paramedics arrived at noon, gentle and professional. But when they moved to transfer Frank, Wolf placed himself between them and the bed, unmoving, growling low. "Wolf, please," Sarah begged. "We're going to fight for him. You have to let us." Only after she knelt and looked him directly in the eye did he move, step by reluctant step, to the side. They loaded Frank into the ambulance. Sarah rode with him, her fingers laced with his. Wolf lay at the foot of the gurney, silent and watching, his entire body rigid with something deeper than fear. It was knowing. At Memorial, staff who had seen them dozens of times now watched in silence. The familiar nurse at the front desk offered Sarah a sympathetic nod. Room 312 had been prepared for the committee. As they wheeled Frank in, Wolf took his position by the bed, never once looking away. The hospital room had been rearranged to feel less like a ward and more like a courtroom. A conference table sat beneath the window, papers stacked neatly, waiting for signatures that could end a life. Dr. Reynolds arrived first, flanked by two members of the ethics committee. Serious, silent professionals with tired eyes. Sarah, Lisa, and Michael stood when they entered, but Wolf remained where he was, at the foot of the bed, eyes locked on Frank. "We want to hear from everyone," Dr. Reynolds said, voice measured. "This isn't just a clinical decision, it's a family one." Sarah's voice shook but didn't falter. "My husband is still here. He hasn't given up, and we won't either. I know what the machines say, but I also know him." Lisa added softly, "Wolf knows. He senses something none of us can explain." Michael hesitated, torn between love and logic. "I want to believe. I don't see the signs." Then Wolf rose. Without a sound, he walked slowly to Frank's side. The room fell into breathless quiet. The shepherd placed his muzzle gently on Frank's chest, his body trembling, as if transferring something only animals understood: loyalty, memory, soul. And then it happened. A sharp beep from the monitor, then another. The rhythm changed, faster, stronger. Dr. Reynolds snapped around. "Check the EEG," he ordered. The technician's voice cracked. "Neural activity spiking, elevated response. He's registering." Gasps filled the room. Lisa clutched Sarah's arm. Michael stepped back, stunned. Even the ethics committee stood frozen, their solemn resolve evaporating in the face of what they'd just witnessed. Wolf looked up, amber eyes meeting Dr. Reynolds. "Told you so," they said. The silence that followed was deafening, like the world itself was holding its breath. Frank's eyelids fluttered, just once, small, fragile, but real. Dr. Reynolds leaned in, his voice suddenly urgent. "Frank, can you hear me?" No reply came, but the machines did not lie. Something had changed. Not a miracle, but a beginning. Wolf didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply rested his head on Frank's chest, eyes closed, exhaling as if he had been holding that breath for 2 years. Sarah crumpled into Lisa's arms, her tears no longer grief, but release. "He's coming back to us," she whispered. The ethics committee didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, Dr. Simmons, the lead, nodded toward the machines. "We'll postpone any decisions," she said, "indefinitely." As the hospital staff moved quickly to stabilize Frank and reevaluate his care plan, Michael stepped aside, stunned. He looked at Wolf, not as a skeptic, but as a son humbled by something beyond logic. Gently, he knelt and placed a hand on the shepherd's back. "You never stopped believing," he whispered. "None of us did. Not really." Outside, the clouds finally broke. Sunlight poured through the hospital windows and spilled across Frank's blanket. And in that golden light, for the first time in 730 days, Wolf's tail thumped twice against the floor. He knew.